Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam, folks. I'm so excited today to be joined by Mike Couzens. Mike is a broadcaster for ESPN. He's been with ESPN since 2012. He's also called games in the minor leagues, a graduate of Syracuse University. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today.
Billy, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Well, I want to start off with how have you been handling this pandemic? I mean, this coronavirus pandemic has affected our lives both professionally and personally. I'm sure it's affected you and your job with ESPN. So, how has this whole last 10 months affected your job and personally as well?
Well, for quite a while, from the beginning of March until college football got started back up again around Labor Day, there just was not a lot going on. ESPN had the live rights to the KBO and some Major League Baseball, and neither of those sports are ones that I'm involved with. So it was just kind of sit and wait my turn and be a little bit antsy until then. And then college football came back, and now we're into the thick of college basketball. And this is where I think the biggest change has been is that we're now, for the most part, calling games from home. So it's been an adjustment in terms of learning how to call a game off of a monitor versus being there in person, and how to train your eyes of looking at the monitor versus the Zoom feed where you can see the analyst versus the stats feed to make sure that you're getting all the fouls right and the scoring right and the runs of scoring correct. So those have been the biggest adjustments. Although overall, I say there's not really any complaints from me about having, let's say I have a 6:30 tip off and I'm off the air by 8:30 and on my couch 5 minutes later. That's been a positive change. But yeah, it's definitely been to borrow a term from the tech world, a disruption to the way we do things.
Do you think some of these changes are going to stay even post-pandemic? I mean, it seems like it's a lot easier for these networks to park you guys at home with the monitor and some other equipment, let you guys call a game. Do you think we'll see some of these changes that you've seen already continue to stay post-pandemic?
To some extent, I think yes. For others, I think that it will go back to what we were doing before because, for the biggest games, no matter what the sport is, I think there's a great value to having the announce team there, having the production team there, because there's certain things that you just can't get by watching a game on a video screen. Whether it's seeing an official make a signal to the scorer's table or to coaches, or coaches interacting with their players on the bench. When you're watching a game, there's only one screen that's live at a time. Now at home, we have access to the other camera feeds as well that are all make up what ends up on TV, but it's just not the same as being there and understanding the way that things are happening. But from a cost savings perspective, I think, as any network that does this is a business, they want to be able to make money and do things in a responsible way. So I think to some extent, yeah, broadcasting from home will be here for the long term.
Well, let's go back to more happier times. Mike, when did you first know you wanted to become a sportscaster?
I think it really set in with me when I was able to do it at Syracuse when I first started, because in high school, my extent with, or the extent that I was involved with journalism was the high school newspaper. And, I didn't really receive a lot of guidance. It's a high school paper. You write your articles, you turn them in, and eventually they show up in print. And so when I got to be involved with live events at Syracuse and having a live microphone in front of me in a studio, or whether it was before you even get on the air, you start out doing behind the scenes things, whether it's answering the phone or cutting highlights during a game broadcast, or sitting in the stands making a tape. You go to a men's or a women's basketball game and you do that. And when I understood that that was a career path and that I could get not only into the game for free, but also one of the best seats in the house, that was an area I immediately knew that I wanted to be a part of that.
That's awesome to hear. And you mentioned Syracuse. I mean, you went to Newhouse where, you think about all these legends that have gone there, Marv Albert, Bob Costas, guys like that. I mean, for those who don't know, what's the dynamic like to go to a prestigious journalism school like Syracuse? I mean, are you guys competing with each other to get on air? I mean, how did that help you form to becoming a sportscaster today?
Probably the best way to phrase it would be competitive collaboration. We all aspire to be at the top of what we're doing. And at that age, at this nascent stage of our careers from 18 to 22, we're all also learning and we're all also making mistakes as we go along. So I love that aspect of it, that everybody wanted to do well, but we also wanted to help each other improve as we went along. So I think the reason that over time that there have been a lot of people who have found professional success starting out at the Newhouse School at Syracuse is because you're with so many other like-minded individuals that you prioritize those things. Whether, a friend of yours says, hey, do you want to go to the soccer game and make a tape? Or do you want to go to a football game on a Friday night and go to a local high school and make a tape? Or you just end up hanging out in the studio and learning things by osmosis, because that was where I spent the majority of my time, was around the 2 radio stations on campus. I did enough to get my schoolwork done, but I really dedicated myself to just being there and learning everything that I could. And I had a lot of friends and my roommates who wanted to do the same thing.
Man, that's awesome. And, you also called minor league baseball at a number of areas. I mean, Fort Wayne, Indiana, of course, Syracuse, New York with the Chiefs, and Dayton, Ohio. What are some of your favorite memories working in minor league baseball?
A lot of it for me is the people that you meet along the way, because guys that end up in the major leagues who I saw just along the way, Steven Strasburg, Trey Turner, Max Fried, Austin Hedges were some of the guys who I saw in almost 3 years in Fort Wayne. That's a big part of the fun. And also that there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. Even though there's not a big audience, the whole broadcast is up to whether you can get it on the air, and can you put together a pregame show and put together the game notes. And it's a lot of long hours for not a lot of pay, but it really makes you find out whether you do love it, because the minor league season is long. It was 140 games in 162 days or somewhere around that, if I have my math right. So not a lot of off days. I may have just given too many off days, perhaps. Maybe it was 140 and 152. That sounds more right, because it was usually about 1 or 2 days off a month. And it's a lot of fun, and you get to see a lot of places. This is not specific to minor league baseball, but to the job in particular, is that you get to go a lot of places that you might not otherwise visit on your own. Because in the Midwest League where I worked, you have teams in Dayton, in Greater Cleveland, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in Lansing, Michigan, in Clinton, Iowa, in Davenport, Iowa, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, South Bend. So you get to go all these places and meet lots of great and interesting people. And there is one pitcher who will always stand out to me from my time in Fort Wayne, who was pitching in the Pecos League in Las Vegas, but it was Las Vegas, New Mexico. His name's Eric Yardley, and he's a submarine sidearm pitcher, and he's made it to the major leagues and had a pretty successful career. But he was so far away from the major leagues that he was sleeping in a house that the team provided on an air mattress with 8 guys to 1 room. So these cool stories of people you meet along the way. And not all those guys are going to end up playing in the major leagues, but then it's fun to see what else they go on to do. And now that through social media, we can keep up with each other, that's been really enjoyable to me.
I've talked to a number of professional broadcasters, and they always say that the craziest stories that they've experienced in their career are from the minor leagues. Is there a crazy story that you can remember, maybe the safest story that you can share that happened in the minor leagues that made you think, man, this is something else?
It's funny that people often have stories about a bus breaking down or something really insane. Nothing really wild happened to me, but I think the greatest experience that I took away from that was how to be careful with what you say on the air. Because when you work for a team, sometimes, not any of the teams that I worked for, there's the expectation that you're going to be the ultimate homer for that team and nothing's ever going to be bad. And so we had a pitcher who, it was probably his first 5 starts, got off to a really rocky start. His ERA was somewhere above 9, just a really suboptimal start. And so I said on the air, it's been a really bad start to the year for this guy. And so I'm around the ballpark the next day, and he comes up to me and he goes, "Hey man, I heard you were talking bad about me yesterday on the radio." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, what did you hear?" And he said, "Well, I heard you said blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, is it true? Have you had a bad start to the season?" And he goes, "Well, I guess so." And so it's a reminder that since the players aren't listening to your broadcasts, and when you're in minor league baseball, it's really a family and friends audience. So that was probably relayed to him by somebody else who said that they were talking trash about you. So, if you do have something that is not going to paint a team in a negative light, make sure you have something to back it up. And to be able to understand those dynamics of dealing with players in a clubhouse and a manager who might not always be in a good mood. And so it tests you every day because you're around that team. Whereas now I might see a team in a given sport once or twice in a year. So you hit the bigger picture stuff. And in baseball, you're with each other day to day. So it's almost like the relationship with your siblings when you're growing up. You might not like each other every day, but you still have to get along at the end of the day.
It's definitely a great analogy right there. So you got your education at Syracuse. You did all these games in the minor leagues. How did this opportunity open up with ESPN?
Well, it was a lot of good luck and good timing, which is what I tell any college broadcaster getting into the business, is that a lot of it is being prepared when an opportunity comes, but it also comes from creating your opportunity. So I got the job in Fort Wayne in 2012. That was my first full-time job in minor league baseball after having worked seasonal jobs with the Reds affiliate in Dayton, Ohio, and then as the voice of Vermont women's basketball in Burlington, Vermont. And fortunately, the team in Fort Wayne, the Tin Caps, was one of, and still remains, just a very small number of teams that broadcast all of their home games on TV. So, of course, there's a Virginia Tech connection in here where I had started to get to know Bill Roth a little bit. And I sent Bill some of my baseball tape. And Bill said, well, I don't know if I'm the best person to look at baseball tape because I haven't really called that in a while, having done football and basketball for so long at Virginia Tech. So he sent it along to a producer of his who he had called college baseball with many years ago at ESPN. And then it ended up in the hands of some other people. I'm not exactly sure what the chain of distribution was that it went through. And that was in the summer of 2012. And then in November of 2012, I got an email asking if I could work some games on ESPN3. And because I lived in the Midwest, I went up to the University of Wisconsin. I went to Notre Dame. I went to Purdue. And from there, they allowed me more opportunity. I started to do high school basketball throughout the summers and started doing that in 2013. And I guess they trusted me enough and offered me a full-time position in 2014. And since then, I've done college football, college wrestling, college basketball, baseball, softball, a little bit of Major League Baseball on ESPN radio. And I've enjoyed every second of it.
And you mentioned all those sports you've done. I'm curious because you have that experience and knowledge now. What's the hardest sport to call?
For me, it was actually ultimate frisbee. I did that in the summer of 2013 with a friend of mine named Evan Lepler, who is now a national broadcaster and does college football and college basketball, primarily in the ACC. But he has also become the voice of ultimate frisbee. And so I got asked to do a little bit of that with him. He was the analyst for that. And thank goodness, because I came in having no knowledge about the sport at all. And not only was it an adjustment to get used to the rules and regulations and the norms of the sport, but also because it's not an NCAA licensed sport, the club teams from those colleges are not allowed to use the logos and nicknames of their schools. So not only are you getting used to just watching a new sport, but let's say you have a team from Iowa, they're not the Hawkeyes, or a team from Rutgers, and they're not the Scarlet Knights. So your brain just has to do a lot of reconditioning. But thankfully, I had great support on that, and Evan was awesome. He's a play-by-play guy by trade, so he was able to help me out as well. So that was definitely the one that had the biggest learning curve.
And not only have you done all these sports, I mean, you've traveled all over the country. What's the favorite, or maybe do you have a few places that really stand out to you? Like, man, I really enjoyed visiting that place. Maybe not just for the college campus or the stadium, but also to get to explore the city as well.
Number one for me, where I spent Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, is San Diego. One, it's a beautiful city. But to be along the coast, I just love to be near the ocean and near water. So that was really special for me. I got to take a bus tour around there because I had an off day and was able to really see the sights. And I grew up in New York, so that seems, it is the whole continent away. So it was really something different. Seattle was also really cool to visit. And I love going to the cities in the ACC, which is the league where I've worked most often in college basketball, whether it's the Triangle in North Carolina, or whether it's to go back to my alma mater at Syracuse, or to take a trip down to Florida or Charlottesville, which is a great city, Atlanta, a huge metropolis. That's really exciting for me because getting to go different places and meet new people is kind of like 1 and 2. And what I love about this job, number 3, is that you get to go watch a live sporting event, but you can't control the outcome of that game or whether it's going to be a good game. So if you get a good game, it's a cherry on top. But getting to go see other places, and I can't leave out Colorado either. Getting to cover Mountain West football and going to see some of the mountains in Colorado Springs or Fort Collins and Albuquerque. There's just so many cool places to go. And so I've got 2 continental U.S. states left. Wyoming is one, and Montana is the other, and then Alaska and Hawaii. So I'm 46 out of 50. I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, it's awesome. Hopefully, you'll get to check off all those states pretty soon here. Mike, what's your advice to young broadcasters trying to make it in this pandemic? I mean, as you know, this business was already competitive even before this pandemic, and now young broadcasters like myself coming out of college soon will have to deal with the realities facing this situation with coronavirus. So, what's your advice to guys like us on how we can make it even after this pandemic?
I think this is the best time to be able to reach out to other broadcasters and ask them to review your work, because while opportunities now probably are fewer because there's just less events happening, even on my side of it, every day we get an email of, here are the games whose networks and times have changed, or this team has been subbed in for this team, or these games have been canceled. So it's happening to everybody. But also, broadcasters, especially during the summer, and less so now, but still certainly to some extent, are home. We're at our computers more often. I have not traveled for an event in probably 3 weeks, and I don't have an event that I won't be calling from my house for the foreseeable future. So we're home more often, which, I always say, and I have it in my Twitter bio, if you're a young aspiring college broadcaster, send me your tape. I'm happy to watch it, because I think that's the most important thing, is to be able to get feedback, especially for college broadcasters. To every broadcast, make sure that the next one is your best one. That doesn't mean it has to be perfect, because I've been out of college for 10 years. I haven't had a perfect broadcast yet, and I know I never will. It's something we always aspire to, but it's somewhat of a golden ticket, if you will, that it's so rare and elusive. And so find out what other people's paths have been too, whose work you admire at the professional level. Because that's another fact to know early on, is that there is no one path. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, there's certain accreditations you get, and then you become that. To be a broadcaster, you don't even need a college degree. You just need to be able to do the skill. So find out how other people got to where they are, and understand that there's going to be some luck involved along the way, but also, to, when your opportunity comes, be ready to seize it.
Mike, I wanted to ask you a question, not necessarily related to what you do in the booth, but I remember in the summer you shared a thread about, we had a lot of things going on in our country at the time, but you shared a thread about how, we could make the broadcasting field more diverse. I remember you were talking about in that thread, you referenced the pay of internships. You've even mentioned it now during this conversation, where you weren't get paid a lot, and a lot of other factors. So how do you think we can kind of open up the broadcasting field to try to reach as many people as possible? Is it starting with, as you mentioned, maybe trying to see if we can get some of these internships, some of these opportunities are more available to people in terms of the pay, so that maybe we can open up the broadcasting field a little bit?
That's absolutely part of it, because I acknowledge that it was a privilege for me to be able to go work for 2 summers in the Cape Cod Baseball League where I did not get paid. I worked a job in the mornings, but still that wasn't enough to get by just for me. And then in my first 2 jobs out of college, I was not able to pay all of my bills on my own. I had financial support from home. If there's anything that we've learned this summer, it's that there is a massive racial wealth gap in our country. So that favors younger white broadcasters who are coming out of school, statistically speaking, not in all cases, but statistically speaking, who will have more generational, more family wealth, and will have the opportunities to go and work in unpaid internships because they can get help from mom and dad. So that's a problem. That's why our field is racially not diverse. The other part of it too, I think, is it's a supply and demand problem, but I think if people want to make the change, they can, is the low pay of entry-level jobs too. For instance, my first full-time job, I earned $21,600. If you divided that into the hours that I worked, it was less than $1 an hour. But not everybody can go and do that, because not only was it, that was the pay, but I also had to relocate there on my own. So to pack up all my stuff, and I also had to have a car to be able to go and do that, to put down a deposit on an apartment, and you have to have a deposit for your utility companies. So for people to say, if we truly care about the field being different than it is today, how do we as employers make those changes too? I think that's a big part of it. So then as employers, if you want to make that change, also think about where you search for your applicants. Are you only looking at the same journalism schools over and over again, which, oh, by the way, have become prohibitively expensive? college is not cheap. It costs in some cases in upwards of $60,000 or $70,000, which we've seen that beyond mortgage debt, student loan debt is the highest debt in the United States. That's a massive problem. And so that limits opportunities for people further. So are we going to look at the same journalism schools over and over again? Or are we going to look at other schools, let's say HBCUs? Because just because I went to Syracuse University doesn't mean that I'm going to be a better broadcaster than someone who went to an HBCU. I just think that historically speaking, people have not always looked at different schools. And that's part of the problem too. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's not something that's going to change overnight, but we have to start by recognizing the issues and understanding what are the steps we can take toward fixing those issues. One of the great things that has been done so far this summer, Adam Giardino, a broadcaster from the Northeast, has started a fund for Black broadcasters that is not only going to give scholarships, but is also going to create mentorship opportunities to connect people who may not have otherwise been connected. And I think that is an important first step to understanding how we can create more equity and equal opportunity within broadcasting.
And that's definitely a lot of a great insight you shared. And I was curious because I know that Syracuse helped shape a lot of who you are. I mean, you mentioned Syracuse is right up there in terms of expensive, in terms of a private school, and many people might not be able to afford to go there. Do you think you would have been able to get to where you are today, if you had gone to a different school other than Syracuse? I mean, do you think you're able to get kind of an equal education at some of these other, maybe lesser known, not even journalism schools, and be able to get to a place where you are broadcasting with ESPN?
So there's two parts to that answer. One is the educational component. And I think that I don't put as much value on my in-class education relative to what I do professionally as you might say if you were going to be a chemist or a lawyer, because those things are directly applicable. Now, the curriculum, of course, since I graduated has changed to become, in some cases, more sports centric, or at least more classes devoted to sports broadcasting. So that's a little bit different than it was because of the invigorated interest in getting into sports broadcasting. Now, would I have gotten to where I am? I think that that's up for debate. I don't know that there's a clear answer to it because, like I said, luck is a big part of it. But in all the jobs that I got coming out of college, and I think this is where the real value lies for someone who's a graduate of, you know, any program that has a name in that industry that's valuable. You know, in the same way, if you look at Supreme Court justices who went to an Ivy League law school, you know, there are, I guess you could say there are Ivy League schools of broadcasting. Sean McDonough famously says the Harvard of Central New York for Syracuse, tongue in cheek. But every job that I got was through a connection of a Syracuse alum. So my job in Dayton was my first job out of college, came through a connection. My job in Vermont came through a connection. My job in Fort Wayne came through a connection from one of those jobs. You know, helping me to get to ESPN was through Bill Roth, who was a Syracuse alum from several decades ago. So it was certainly helpful. Now, that's true for a lot of people in a lot of industries. And, you know, the old saying is it's not what you know, it's who you know. So it's true in many businesses, but it definitely has been helpful for me. That's an indisputable truth.
And, you know, some of those connections you mentioned, and you talked about the Virginia Tech connections you have, Bill Roth, who, you know, you talked about how he helped you potentially get this job at ESPN, Andrew Allegretto, who was at Virginia Tech for a long time. Now he's at Tulane. I mean, so you do have a lot of Virginia Tech connections in terms of your friendships. What do those friendships in particular with Bill and Andrew mean to you?
Well, we're really good friends today. I want to take you back to the summer of 2011 because I interviewed for the job that Andrew ended up getting. So Andrew and I were separated by a year in college. He had come out and he was doing some football work at Charleston Southern. And so we both flew to Blacksburg to do an interview. And I remember I was getting ready to go on the air. I was in Dayton and I got a call from Bill and he goes, "Hey, you know, we appreciate your time, but we're going to go in a different direction." And I learned that it's Andrew. But Andrew and I had always been close because in my second summer in the Cape Cod Baseball League, I encouraged Andrew to apply to work for the team that I did. So we spent the whole summer together calling baseball games every night. And I would visit with either Bill, Andrew, or both of them every time I would come back to Blacksburg. And now Andrew, I have not gotten to see him yet since he's moved to New Orleans and become the voice of Tulane. But I talk to Bill all the time. I talk to Andrew all the time. And there's a big age gap between me and Andrew and Bill, but it doesn't feel that way just because we become really friendly over the years. So, I was really crushed at the time that I didn't get that job because it was my first opportunity for a full-time job, but everything's turned out all right.
For sure, for both you and Andrew as well. And Mike, you've been so gracious with your time. So I wanted to ask you one final question. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? I mean, you do all these sports for ESPN, and that's awesome because you get to call a variety of things. Is there something else you want to do in 10 years? Maybe do an assignment that you haven't done yet? I mean, where do you see yourself 10 years from now, 2030?
This is a business where if you had told me 10 years ago, age 21 me, that you're going to be doing college football and college basketball for ESPN, that would not have, my head would have exploded. It would have been entirely incomprehensible for me. So to predict where I'll be at age 41, I have no idea. I wish I knew, because even 2 years ago, if you had told me you're going to be doing an entire college basketball season from your basement, that would have sounded ridiculous, but so would a global pandemic. So I don't know. My goal every year is to continue to improve at what I do and get the feedback from the people who oversee my work to say, am I improving? Am I doing what you're wanting me to do to continue to bring play-by-play at a high level to the broadcasts? And if the answer continues to be yes, then I'll be happy with that. One of the things about working for ESPN is that no matter what seat you are on the roster, whether you're batting cleanup or you're the 25th man, you're still proverbially on the Yankees of sports broadcasting. You're on the best team. And so there are people who have been working at the company who have been doing it as long as, if not longer than I've been alive. So while my desire to continue to get better also coincides with a desire to call bigger and better games, I have to wait for those opportunities. And I understand that because there are people who have been here for a long time who are really good and really well respected at what they do. And I know that as long as I continue to work hard and continue to do good work for the company, I think that I'm in a good spot.
Well, Mike, this has been such a pleasure for your time. Thank you for not just what you do in the broadcast booth, but all you do to help young broadcasters like myself. And can't say how much I appreciate your time today.
Billy, my pleasure. And if I can help anybody out, my email address is just my name, mikecouzens@gmail.com, or you can reach me on Twitter as well.
For sure. Well, that's Mike Couzens, ESPN broadcaster. He called a lot of games in the minor leagues as well. He's been so nice to join us today. This has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. Thank you so much, folks, and we'll see you next time.